from the Mercy One studio.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and the Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.
Welcome, folks, to the Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
We are coming to you live from these United States of America, here right smack dab in the middle, Des Moines, Iowa, in the Iowa Catholic Radio Studios. Bud, nice to have you with us today.
Oh, great to be here, Bo. I was surprised by that kind gesture.
Yeah, you know, well, the like normal, I don't like to, put people back into our shoes too much, but the board operators were trying to pit us against each other, and let's just be honest. So I wanted to show some solidarity.
Well, we were talking about this new Center for Human Flourishing that's underway at Mercy College that you're the director of, and you recently came across or were able to garner some fine recording equipment. And so what kicked off the discussion was who's the proper owner of that equipment. And really it's Mercy College of Health Sciences, but right. I think you are the gatekeeper.
That's right. So yeah, they were trying to see if they could pit gatekeepers against gatekeepers. That's what we should say is Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr, both gatekeepers of different types at Mercy College of Health Science who underwrites our show. But that seems so negative. I'd like to say gate promoter.
Well, I'm academic dean, so there might be a few gates, but we try to be welcoming.
Gate tender.
Gate tender, that's
better.
Right.
Senior advisor for mission initiatives on my part. And yes, director of the new Center for Human Flourishing, underwritten by Iowa Catholic, on Iowa Catholic Radio, underwritten by Mercy College of Health Sciences. And speaking of gates, ours are not... I don't know what the right way to say this. We open wide because we want people to come mchs.edu.
Yeah, summer term is in full swing with our legacy program, but I also know that the Mercy Plus, I can't keep track of their terms. I know it's quarterly, but we're used to kind of seasonal, like the fall, spring, summer, and it doesn't quite work out that way because they have a new semester starting in a few weeks here.
Yeah, and I think that for some people maybe, but now we can, instead of saying gatekeeper, we can talk about old men who are used to semesters named like that. One of the things that's really nice about Mercy Plus, and many of the ways and modes in which you can be a part of Mercy College, is that they're not tied to the same sort of time schedule. So there's multiple ways throughout the year to start getting involved, to getting your education so that you can continue the ministry of healing, which is what Mercy College is all about.
That's right. We all have unique schedules depending on the responsibilities in your life, whether that's family, children, of course, work. So Mercy tries to be flexible, I think, in how we deliver some educational possibilities to folks.
Absolutely. Speaking of flexibility, I don't have as much, but I woke up today feeling like I ran a marathon, and all I really did was travel back and forth to Oklahoma and Kansas for Memorial Day weekend, and that was enough to feel like I need performance-enhancing drugs, legal performance-enhancing drugs, but none, at least ibuprofen.
Yeah, I guess since we're sharing things on air today, I've had flexibility issues throughout my life as well. And it's caused some of my lower back pain. I guess my hammies are not very flexible, but in high school I was a real nerd, probably still there in some ways. So I was one of those folks who like sweated every grade or whatnot.
Right.
And I had a PE coach who I think it was George H.W. Bush who released some sort of physical standards for Americans.
Yeah, yes, I remember.
And so PE was not going to be like just an easy A. He was actually going to test us according to those standards. And I did okay on most parts, but it was really like stressing me out because like the two things that I absolutely couldn't do is climb a rope. And then my flexibility was like D-, and I just thought that was unfair.
Yeah, the rope climbing, if you would go by what the 80s was really implanted to our heads, there was a lot of ropes to climb into the future that never really materialized.
No, we've been waiting for hovercrafts and ropes for the last couple decades now.
And then as the joke goes, quicksand. Quicksand really never showed up like anybody said. Well, yeah, bad hamstrings, bad backs. That could be the alternate title for our show here. What I will say, that it was worth the getting a sore lower back being a road warrior, because I got to go back. The first student that I've ever had, not the first student I had, but the first student to become a priest. I went to his first mass and got his first blessing. So Father Will Stever, who, when I was teaching at Wichita State at the Newman Center there, he was one of my students. So as a convert, no family member has, of course, become a priest. But as someone connected to me, first student becoming a priest, it was quite the deal.
Yeah, I think on those occasions, Bo, it really is a pretty powerful reminder of sacramental grace, because you were, blessed to be able to teach that young man, and then, through providence, he came around to providing you with like a blessing that only a priest can give, and so it's really powerful and I think touching in those moments.
Or as some of the people on Facebook reminded me, is he became a priest even though I taught him. So I like that idea too. That actually really butts up against what we're talking about with the show today. So we're continuing our series on the 4 marks of the church and how they impact the common good. So, of course, we talked about oneness, or the social good of unity last time we had this. So today we're going to be talking about that the church is holy, right? The church is one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. So we're doing the mark of the church of holiness and talking about the social good of being set apart. And, that might sound like an oxymoron. Like, how can we talk about the social good of being set apart? But holiness and the holiness of the church, I think, is very illuminating about what we should expect as Catholics within a social order, because, of course, we belong to a greater social order, the kingdom of heaven, and that interplay and what we are called to do in the world because of this holiness is going to be the topic of the show. So it's going to be exciting. Looking forward to it. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Budmar. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Folks, if you want to keep up, if you want to let us know what you're thinking, you can do that through the ZipWhip line. 515-223-1150, 515-223-1150, the ZipWhip line. Hashtag UCG for the Uncommon Good. I don't know if we want to open that floodgate, Bud, but we can either ask people to text in and tell us where they have bad flexibility or where they failed in the presidential physical fitness merit, I think is what that was called.
The ZipWhip line could be interesting this week.
The ZipWhip line. 515-223-1150, 515-223-1150. You can also tell us your Memorial Day stories, as long as there's no incriminating evidence. 515-223-1150, the ZipWhip line. We will be back with the Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Budmar here on Iowa Catholic Radio right after this.
You're invited to the Iowans for Life Summer Fundraising Dance Friday, July 23rd, starting at 6:30 under the Jasper Winery Open Air Tent, 2400 George Flagg Parkway, Des Moines. Enjoy live music from the fabulous Rivieras, a dance contest, and live auction. Tickets and more information are available at iowansforlife.org. The Iowans for Life Summer Fundraising Dance, Friday night, July 23rd, starting at 6:30 at Jasper Winery. Learn more at iowansforlife.org.
Iowa Catholic Radio welcomes Matt Maher.
Lord, I need.
For an evening of praise and worship to the Jamie Hurd Amphitheater in West Des Moines, Saturday, June 12th at 6 p.m.
I'm alive because he lives.
With special guest Matt Baird, First Encounter, and JMMJ.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Learn more at nightfireconcerts.org.
There are millions of children that go hungry every day. Thank you to Skeffington's Formalware for supporting Mary's Meals. Their vision is that every child in the world should be able to receive at least one good meal every day in a place of education. MarysMealsUSA.org.
Hi, this is Joe Stopulus. Thank you to construction professionals for underwriting Man Up, Monday mornings at 9 on Iowa Catholic Radio. Construction Professionals, a Catholic family business built on a strong foundation. CPCustomHomes.com.
Sacred Heart Nights of Columbus Can Drive is Saturday morning, June 5th. All proceeds support the charitable works of the Sacred Heart Knights of Columbus. Gather your empty cans and drop them off at Sacred Heart Parish in West Des Moines between 9 and noon. The Sacred Heart Knights of Columbus Can Drive is Saturday morning, June 5th from 9 to noon.
Thank you, Golden Rule Plumbing, Heating, and Cooling, for sponsoring my show. John Lee and Eddie in the morning on Iowa Catholic Radio. Golden Rule, servicing Des Moines for over 15 years. They obey the rules to live by, especially the Golden Rule. Online at goldenrulephc.com.
Back to the Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Budmar joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the show. Thank you for supporting Iowa Catholic Radio. Thank you for being a part of what we're going to talk about today. So, we're continuing our series on the 4 marks of the church. So, traditional way to talk about the church, the 4 marks of the church, that the church is one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. So, we talked about the church being one last time in this series, the social good of communion and unity. So, today we're going to talk about holiness and the social good of being set apart, which can sound like an oxymoron, so I think to get right into it, where does that idea of being set apart come from, Bo? Well, there's always a question of what holiness means, and I think a lot of times it gets sort of popularly discombobulated as just merely being a good two shoes. Like if you talk about someone being holy, it's like someone who never gets into trouble, or someone who dots the I's and crosses the T's in matter of faith. But actually, holiness, I think, it's really good to actually pit it against what is considered its opposite to sort of get an idea of what's going on. So you hear people talk about the sacred and the profane. So sacred and holiness, those are just two, basically the same words coming from the Latinite languages with sacred and then the Germanic ones with holy. But that idea is the profane world is not necessarily bad, it's just the common world. And that sacred things or holy things are set apart. And so the question starts to be, why are they set apart? That involves people. Like, why am I set apart if that's what God wants me to be, a holy person set apart? Objects, for instance, a chalice or things like this, why set them apart from common use? But then, of course, holy lands, holy peoples, holy nations, the idea, and God himself, of course, being set apart because of his utter uniqueness, as it were, in any other conception we have in the universe. So, but I think that might be a good way to start talking about how holiness is not merely just an adjective about a person, but that it's a sort of, that it's many things, is to look at the New Testament world and talk about what was at stake when people talked about the Holy Land and why that tract of land was so important.
Yeah, just sticking for a moment, Bo, with that distinction that you're bringing up, this is a really important point. And preparing for today's show, you get a little anxious as the host because when you talk about holiness in today's context, I think a lot of listeners, maybe even those, especially those outside the church, will say, well, where do Catholics get off talking about holiness? And, they may bring up like recent scandals in the church or their Uncle Rick who went to Mass but drank and cussed, etc.
Uncle Rick.
Yeah. And, the fact that the church is, quite frankly, made up of sinful members. On the Oneness show, we talked about St. Robert Bellman's idea of the perfect society. And we tried to emphasize on that occasion that perfection didn't mean that the members of the church are without sin, but that God has provided the church with everything that it needs to fulfill its vocation. And this ties into what we're talking about today because when we think of holiness, we do want to distinguish it from the church, like sort of adding up the behavior of all its members. Mm-hmm. Now, I will get into later in the show about why like righteousness on our part is important, but the holiness primarily has to do with the fact that the Holy Spirit indwells the mystical body of Christ, and that God has providentially ordained the church to, as you say, sanctify the world. So it's not about per se like right behavior, but it's about the divine origins of the church. Folks kind of misunderstand this sometimes too. And with the idea of hierarchical, the church is hierarchical. And when they hear that term in our context, we primarily think like there's this top-down authoritarian structure. Well, that word actually comes from priesthood. So there is authority and there is a structure, but when we talk about the church being hierarchical, it's the fact that it has like a sacred or divine origin. And so really the holiness of the church, there's a lot that we could get into here, but when you think in the Old Testament about the theophany of the burning bush, the church is an earthly reality. It's made up of human beings, but it's indwelled by the Holy Spirit, and so it's consumed with that pneumatological fire, but not burn up. And that places a heavy like so to speak, like burden or vocation on us, but primarily it's about the means that God has decided to dispense his grace in the world.
No, and that's absolutely a good way to get into what the historical example, because people get the order wrong is what we're getting at. They think, oh, if I act holy, then I will be of God. But it's actually, no, because you are of God, holiness is now demanded of you, right?
Yeah.
The history in the Old Testament of all the problems with the Hebrew people facing is to say that you've been set apart by God's choice for a reason, not for yourselves, and we'll get into that. And when they've rebelled as a holy people. Like, I think this is what people get wrong, is they're like, oh, well, you haven't lived like you should, so you're not holy. And you're like, no. God sets apart things, and to profane those things set apart is bad news, as the technical theological term. But you're right. We need to think about that the opposite way, about how this is happening. So when we think about the prime example, that God has chosen a holy land, funny enough, was going to be a huge part of world affairs because it was simply the best trade route around the eastern part of the Mediterranean. And so it's no wonder that the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, I should say, when they had this kingdom, that eventually they were going to be enthralled in all of the geopolitics for centuries about what was happening there. From the Egyptians to the Greeks, the Romans, everybody, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, all these people cared about this tract of land for a very earthly reason, that they wanted to march their armies and their merchants through this place. But God had set apart Israel for a different purpose. And I would argue, precisely because God, in his good providence, knows that so much of the world was going to trek through that place, he set apart this piece of land. But that didn't make the land necessary. It wasn't like, oh, the land is holy, or it had like really good vegetation. In fact, part of the whole talk about the land of Israel is there's entire tracts of it that are not great, for instance, for farmland, but that God set this land apart, and he set this people apart for a specific purpose. And that's where we're getting into holiness and the social good of being set apart.
Yeah, we talked about this a couple months ago with Hans Bersma about the roots of the priesthood, and that Adam, our first parent, was called by God to be a priest and to tend the garden. So part of the original sin was neglect of his proper priestly calling. So when God restores that vocation, and when he grants it to the people of Israel, whose father is Abraham, they're called, like you said, to be set apart. And this is a really detailed discussion, but just to give like the flyover view, when you get into the Old Testament laws, it can be like pretty hefty reading, and there's all these like sort of like minutia of things that the people of Israel are or are not supposed to eat, or the type of clothes that they're supposed to wear. And for us, some of that seems completely arbitrary, but it really was that it was a signal that the people were to be set apart. And in some ways, Bo, I think like you were mentioning getting caught up in the geopolitics, like a tension or a line that Israel was always trying to walk with that vocation of holiness is, what does it mean to be alongside these other people, but not exactly like them? And the peoples of the world, because of sin, had organized their common life around things other than divine things. And so by being set apart from them, God again was, he was teaching his people, but he was also signaling to the world that this is a holy people. So when you get to like the book of Exodus, for instance, where the people are in bondage to slavery, with our modern kind of American mindset, we can maybe read that as just a story of political liberation, and the kind of like, again, on the show, we talked about like using politics in different ways, but the way we think about political liberation, it's about freedom or liberty. But as the last Pope Benedict XVI pointed out, when God calls the people out of Egypt, it's not simply about freedom in this kind of like brute sense of the term. It's the freedom to worship, and to worship rightly. And if the people don't lean into that, they've missed their entire reason for being, and their entire reason for being called to this new land.
And so in this being called to the new land, as the Old Testament progresses, of course, there is the whole dynamic of being in the land, misappropriating what they're supposed to do, being carried off from the land in exile, and then at the very end of the Old Testament, being brought back, what most people call like the Second Temple period. In between the Old and New Testament, all sorts of things keep occurring. The book of Maccabees testifies to this. But what you eventually end up with is the Hebrew people who have been carried off and brought back, and precisely as the prophets have spoken and how they've interpreted and how they've prayed and what they've come to agree on is God brought us back for a purpose, and that this purpose, they have a new angle on it because the exile has sort of taught them that it wasn't merely to just have a kingdom for the fun of it, as it were. But now they have this new question because after being brought back, once again they find themselves under the thumb of a different power. Now they haven't been dragged off this time, but Rome has occupied what the Holy Land, the land promised to them in the Old Testament from Abraham on. And so Rome, that's sort of their new bag. Other empires have done this, but Rome is sort of the king of not dragging people off necessarily, allowing them to do their local thing as long as they don't disrupt the order, pay taxes, and things like this. But this presents a massive problems for the Jewish people at the time, because you have to ask yourself, A, why is God allowing this to happen? But B, what does it mean to be a holy people while under the occupational thumb of an empire? And so this is where, when you look at the New Testament and the various groups that Jesus starts to interact with, they are religious groups, but they also take on a political reality. Because when you think of something like the Pharisees or the Sadducees or the Essenes or the Zealots, just to use the four sort of main branches that I think most people end up talking about, whether they've heard this or not, those four branches speak about theological realities, what they think it means to be holy in a theological sense. But you start to see, and I think this gets to the root of the show, this absolutely and automatically has political implications for how they think they have to deal with the Roman Empire currently occupying Israel. And so I think that may be the first thing, but is to describe these four political groups, and maybe after the break we can get into how Jesus takes elements from each but actually critiques all of them.
Yeah, this first century political setting that you're talking about, Bo, it's a perennial analogy for thinking about how we're to live in the world. Because as we know, as believers, as the baptized, we're called to live in the world, but not to be of the world. And New Testament scholars talk about this already, not yet. So in a sense, we live in a context of occupation, meaning that, like in the Lord's Prayer, we pray, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The earthly reality doesn't match completely God's ultimate destiny. So stepping back to what you were talking about with the first century, so the people of Israel are living under Roman occupation. And this is, like you said, a theological question. How could God promise this land, and yet we're under the thumb of a foreign ruler? And in the face of that reality, there were different groups within the people who gave different answers for what the Hebrews were supposed to do in light of that reality. Going over one real quickly, you've got, like you said, the Zealots, and actually some of Jesus' own disciples were Zealots, and they were really political revolutionaries who said you should use violence, any means necessary to overthrow political occupation. Of the Romans, and we all know Jesus' critique of the use of violence to achieve certain political ends. I think the most fascinating for Christians is the Pharisees, because in many ways they were deeply concerned about Torah and God's revelation. And so they're really like Jesus, at the forefront of their minds is holiness, and it's about the application of the law. And so if that's the case, you have to begin to ask, well, why was Christ in some cases so critical of them? And why did, after his ascension into heaven, why did the disciples and Pharisees continue to have this sort of disagreement? And there's a lot to be said here, Bo, but I think for myself, their zeal for the law was not really the problem. It was some of the ways that they applied the law. A quick way to get at this is when Jesus is going to heal on the Sabbath, and some of the religious leaders grumble because healing even is perceived as a work on this most holy day. And Jesus famously replies to their grumbling, the Sabbath was created for man, not man for the Sabbath. So This is really, I mean, this is a tough conversation. How do we apply the law, which Jesus is not throwing off? He says he comes to not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. But to apply the law so that it actually fosters justice and it serves human flourishing rather than detracting from it.
Yeah, and like we said earlier in the show, they get it backwards. They think, oh, if we're holy enough, God will kick the Romans out, rather than, no, you can be holy under any circumstances. And that's part of what we'll get at. So we got two of them, right? The Zealots, which are like, the only way to ensure that this land will be holy is to straight up, the modern word, be terrorists, right? And use they would go into crowds and just start randomly knifing people, hoping that would bring the Roman guards so that they could pick a fight. I mean, eventually, the Jewish war is started by this political group, and they lose permanently, right? Rome wins and kicks all of the Jewish people out of Rome mid-2nd century. But then you have the Pharisees, right, who are personalists, right? Well, this is about like our personal holiness. We'll have more to say about them when we get past the break. The other two groups, the Essenes, which are sort of escapists, as it were, that's truncating a lot of stuff, but essentially they're like, look, we can't be holy in Jerusalem because it's occupied, so they go to the desert, right? John the Baptist may not be an Essene, but he's certainly of that group, right? Monastic, but I would even say more esoteric, more ascetic, the Dead Sea Scrolls sort of community.
Yeah, things have become so corrupt in the standard order that you have to withdraw yourself from the world. I mean, it's akin to this language of the Benedict option today, where the world is just so burdened with these like corrupt realities that the only way is to kind of escape and create a whole new order somewhere else.
And then finally, we have the Sadducees, who they show up in the New Testament, and in many ways are the most hated group. So it's interesting that Jesus doesn't totally castigate them, but of course they are the people that get him killed, although St. John seems to have been part of the priestly class. But this is the priestly class that is accommodationist in some ways. And so you have a stratification of that. In some ways, just any of the rulers of Jerusalem kind of belong to this class because, hey, they think they need to go talk to Pilate to make these deals. At the highest end, you have Jews that are basically like, whatever it takes to stay in the land. And if that means we adopt Roman practices, we're going to adopt Roman practices. Some of them, of course, use this to basically live as Gentiles completely. But their idea is, if the land's holy, do whatever you can to stay there. The Zealots are like, if the land's holy, do whatever you can to kick out the foreign ruler. The Essenes are like, well, holiness is the whole thing. So if you've got to leave, leave. And then the Pharisees, it's this question of personal holiness. And all of them miss the point, but all of them obviously have something that they're getting right. And the proof of this that you alluded to, Bud, is that Jesus chooses apostles from all the groups.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can't be, that's one of the things when we've taught this before is we ask our students, why would Jesus, if he thought that none of them were absolutely correct, why would he choose from all of them?
Except for maybe the Sadducees? Was there...
Well, I think that's where you get like John in the priestly class. So,
okay.
Yeah, so like what, even within these groups, there's a continuum. But like all of them seem to have representatives as people who are at least traveled in those circles, as it were.
Yeah, the Pharisees get right that personal holiness is absolutely vital. The Sadducees are right to see the temple as central to God's plan for humankind. The Zealots, to resist an injustice when you're faced with it. And then, weirdly, like the Essenes, when you start reading about them, there's already some precursors to Catholicism. They're very concerned about, like they do a sort of a baptism ceremony. Mm-hmm. They had all these aqueducts to their kind of desert communities. So like you said...
Even the apocalyptic aspects, right? That they see that this is tied up with like the last age of the world and things like this.
It's almost like what we say about heresies. It's taking one element of the faith and guarding it or prizing it to the extent that you actually lose the whole.
And now, to be fair, at this time in history, so heresies like have the deposit of faith and they take one aspect of it and blow it out of proportion, like you said, or like overguard it. This one is sort of reverse way, right? The Jews are honestly asking, what does it mean to be holy? What does the role of the Messiah, right? And they all, when Jesus comes, and even when people think he's the Messiah, they have great expectations, but along their ideas about what the Messiah must be. And if the Messiah is anything else, it means the anointed one, which gets back to the Holy One who will usher in holiness. So the figure of the Messiah and what that means is going to be tied up to what you think holiness in the political and social order means. And so when we get back from the break, that's what we'll explicate. How is it that Jesus took what is right about these groups, threw out what is wrong, and came up with the Christian understanding of what holiness and the social order must mean? This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back right after this. Folks, if you want to keep in touch with what Iowa Catholic Radio is up to, it's easy to do. Just need to follow our social media online. You can go, first of all, to iowacatholicradio.com, where you can listen live, donate, sign up for newsletters, and do all of that beautiful stuff. You can also go to Facebook, look up Iowa Catholic Radio, become our friends, and then you will get to see our posts. And who wouldn't want that? Finally, you can go to, you can go to Twitter and follow at IA Catholic Radio. See all our tweets. You can also download the Iowa Catholic Radio app. And anywhere there's data, you can listen live, listen to pre-recorded shows and prayers, donate, and keep up with us that way as well. Finally, you can use the Alexa robot. Say something like, "Hey, Alexa," and then the magic spell, and then you can listen. I'm always confused about what that means, but if you use Alexa, you're already ahead of the game of me. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back right after this.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and John Leonetti in the Morning provided by Bell Construction.
Bell Construction is a roofing company. They specialize in residential re-roofs, light commercial jobs. Bell Construction, 515-963-4494. Bell Construction. Thanks to Blessman International for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio. Every year, Blessman International leads teams of Central Iowans to share the compassionate heart of Christ with orphans and vulnerable children in South Africa. You can learn more and sign up for a trip at blessmaninternational.org.
Thank you, Ashworth Vision Clinic, for underwriting Dowling Catholic Sports 365 on Iowa Catholic Radio. Ashworth Vision Clinic online at ashworthvision.com. Ashworth Vision Clinic, 515-440-4610.
Thank you, Dental Associates, for supporting Dowling Catholic Sports 365. Dental Associates, addressing your smile, needs, and dreams. 515-225-6742. Online at DesMoines-DentalAssociates.com.
Thank you, Big Red Q Quick Print, for underwriting the sports report. Family owned and operated since 1980, Big Red Q Quick Print is a full-service print shop, ready to help you with all your printing needs with speed and accuracy. BigRedQ-DesMoines.com.
Thank you, Golden Rule Plumbing, Heating, and Cooling, for sponsoring my show. John Leonetti in the Morning on Iowa Catholic Radio. Golden Rule, servicing Des Moines for over 15 years. They obey the rules to live by, especially the Golden Rule. Online at goldenrulephc.com.
Here's your forecast on Iowa Catholic Radio. High pressure is moving into the Central Plains, so our weather pattern looks sunny for the next few days, but our temperatures will be going up a little bit. 80 for the high this afternoon and sunny. Overnight looks clear with our low in the upper 50s and then mid-80s for the high tomorrow. Getting a little breezy, wind gusting to 20 miles per hour and mostly sunny. Then we heat up a little bit more for Friday, breezy, sunny, and 90. I'm meteorologist Steve Hamilton on Iowa Catholic Radio.
Back with The Uncommon Good, Bob Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr coming to you this Wednesday. Thank you for joining us and listening to the show. We are doing our second installment of a series on the 4 marks of the Church and the common good. So the 4 marks, the Church is 1, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. We are talking about holiness today. So the Church is holy, the social good of being set apart. So we've been talking about what might seem like an oxymoron or a paradox, that if we have a social good that's about being set apart, how do we do that? So we've been talking about the first century New Testament political situation, where this idea is that you have a holy people in a holy land, the Hebrew people living in Israel, but under the occupation and domination of a foreign power. What does it mean to be set apart while under these circumstances? And Bud, just to really quickly lay out again, we talk about the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes, and the Zealots. The Zealots, the sort of, if the land's holy, then you should, by violent means, even remove the foreigner from the land. The Essenes, who in many ways were escapists, they were sort of the proto-monks, or even sort of like ultra-super ascetic sort of monks, where if the people there aren't holy, then you flee as fast as you can and await for the coming of the new world. The Pharisees, which really talk about personal holiness, And so that, I think, is why Jesus talks with, against, and sort of around them the most. And then finally, the Sadducees, who were accommodationists, right? If the land's holy, do whatever it takes to make sure you can stay there, even if that means accommodating with the foreign power. Now, Bud, we talked about Jesus chose disciples from at least the orbits of all four of those worlds, showing that there's a way in which there's something they all get a bit right, even though they get most of it wrong. Jesus himself then starts to show, as the saying, I am the Messiah, the anointed one, so the coming Holy One that will usher in an age of holiness for the holy people in a holy land. And it's no wonder then that people misunderstood what he was going to be. Was he going to be this conqueror? Was he going to lead them out into the hills? Was he going to be a personal sort of rabbi like the Pharisees and scribes? Was he going to be a king and get Rome to sort of start behaving? And so that's the question that the apostles ask is, what does it mean that you are the Holy One of God and that we're your holy people living this holy land, living in a world that is occupied not only by Rome, but like you said, the Prince of Darkness in many ways. And so that is where the rubber hits the road about holiness and its social implications, is right there in the first century in the New Testament.
Yeah, it's really instructive to get into Jesus' discussions with these different groups, or how he talks about these matters, because when we do apologetics today, often we make it very oppositional. So it's like, here's your idea, here's where it's wrong. But Jesus, when he talks to the people of Israel, he says, like, here's what this group in a sense gets right, but here's where they don't fulfill, like, take it to its telos. And so, for instance, with the Pharisees, he doesn't go after or attack like their zeal for the law. He says the problem is that you're like whitewashed tombs. You're trying to fulfill all righteousness purely through this kind of externality, or like by, I mean, St. Paul later really gets into this, that like the law, though good, in a sense it reveals to us our sin, because we recognize like we can't just like do enough blood, sweat, and tears to fulfill it all. And so Christ is calling his people to the fulfillment of what the law teaches, which ultimately issues into love for God and neighbor. But he realizes that they can only attain this divinely given vocation if they have the gift of his Holy Spirit, and if they have the graces available through preeminently the Eucharist. And so with the Pharisees, he kind of, I mean, in a sense, he shows like, here's how you reach or fulfill the righteousness that they're so concerned about. It's very similar with the Sadducees, where, I mean, to me, like the two telling stories with regards to the temple and how they thought about the temple was, one is that he cleanses it, and he throws out the buyers and sellers, because he says that they've turned what God intended as a house of prayer for all nations into a place of greed and really like taking advantage of the weak and the poor financially. And so he, through that prophetic action, he reveals he shows again, uncovers what the temple is supposed to be about. But the second story, and this is really, I kind of love the disciples because I see so many of my own faults in them. But when they're walking through Jerusalem and the disciples are staring up at the temple and they're like, man, this thing is really majestic. And Herod had done, I mean, various leaders had done a lot to restore the majesty of the temple. And Christ says, like, there won't be one stone here that's left unturned. And of course, he's prophesying that destruction of Jerusalem that you talked about in the first part of the show. Well, that's an affront to the religious leaders. And, on the occasions where Christ talks about the destruction of the temple, they get worked up. And he says, like, well, when the temple's torn down, it will be restored or rebuilt in 3 days. And people balk. They're like, this thing took years to build. He says it's going to be restored in 3 days. And then John, through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, says, but he was talking about the temple, which is his body. So again, Jesus isn't doing away with the temple as central to this vocation of holiness that we've been talking about throughout the show. He's saying the new and greater temple will be his very body, which again is the centerpiece of that is the Eucharist, where for us, like, the temple is not, there is a tradition of pilgrimage in the Catholic faith, but we, in a sense, like, journey to the temple, not by traveling to a specific city, but maybe each day, definitely each Sunday, when we gather for Mass.
Yeah, and that starts to be a beautiful way to point this out. First of all, a sad way, a bittersweet way. All four of those groups are wrong. Not only that we're saying, oh, they had the wrong interpretation, but all their hopes are dashed. The Sadducees were not able to accommodate enough. The temple was razed to the ground. The Zealots lost their war. The Essenes, they eventually disappeared out in the wilderness. They didn't start a second temple. And the Pharisees, I mean, I think some people argue that sort of rabbinic Judaism is the outcome of the Pharisees, which may be true, but the Pharisees at the time there said, if we will only all be holy enough, Rome will leave, or God will intervene and reset the kingdom with a King David in the Holy Land. But also everything that they say actually is sort of mystically fulfilled through Jesus. So like we said, Rome is defeated by the followers, right, of the carpenter of Nazareth. The Essenes, the monastic sort of world that evolves and sprouts up from the church, exceeds anything that they could have imagined. The new temple is the body of Christ, and also we as the body of Christ, right, are the new temples. We're to be temples of the Holy Spirit. But finally, to get one more time at the Pharisees, the kingdom of God does come every time we pray the Our Father, and so to speak, the Holy Spirit makes a true prayer in our hearts. We do have that personal holiness because we have Christ's holiness, right? He gives it to us through grace, through the sacraments, like you're saying. So there's a way in which all of their hopes are dashed, but all of their hopes are fulfilled in a way which they can't imagine. Of course, they can't imagine because the Messiah, Jesus Christ himself, is holy in a way that they misunderstand. And I think the Pharisees are instructive because that order we were talking about, where you think you act holy so that you get stuff, and that's mean to them, and I think people are often unfair to the Pharisees. Mm-hmm. But that idea that that's the order, act holy first and then things come about, is exactly what Jesus reverses. The holiness is God's choice, and you can live into this holiness or not. But the bigger deal that all four miss is that holiness is never for the sake of the one who is holy, but for everyone else. So Jesus Christ, the man for others, right, who comes into this life and is the pure slaughtered lamb that gives himself up for everyone else. By giving away his life, by emptying himself, Christ gained all things, put all things under his feet through the kenosis, the self-emptying of his cross. And so holiness, to be set apart, is never primarily for the people who are set apart. It is always for everyone else. Now, of course, we want to say there's no better happiness than to be holy and to be one with God, to be set apart for God, and then eventually in heaven to be set apart with him. But in this earth, the holy ones are set apart not for their own sake. In fact, often at great peril and great suffering, but they're set apart for all others. And Jesus Christ shows that holiness, that's why holiness, Bud, can never be personal. Because even when you're personally holy, the point is for the sake of others and not for yourself.
Yeah, when we talk about this part of things, Bo, I like to use the term like witness or faithfulness so that we don't mistake what we're called to do as Christians as success. And witness sometimes has to do not with achieving certain ends, but of revealing something or shining a light on a reality that's true regardless of how others respond to it. So kind of like going back to that point of the Exodus and like the calling out of Egypt, we can look at the world today and say like the church is called to this vocation of being set apart. And when we contrast that with other kind of societies or communities, it's not that those communions have no goods within them. You know, like, frankly, to live together, like we've talked about on the show, you need like roads and a water supply and all of that to be like governed and distributed justly. But the problem is that when like secular communities or secular nations, when they mistake their reality as the end or as like the ultimate point of human life, and as Christians, we can't necessarily like show them wrong by just like imposing a kind of order on them, but we can live our vocation well and then shine a light on the true meaning of human life. So like you look at the world around us, and like we've said before, it really yearns to have a true communion and a true unity, but it doesn't know like the foundational basis for that sort of thing. And so we try to organize our lives around like comfortability or material gain or whatever, and it all ends up really poorly. And sadly, in the church is called to witness to something different. And that's where we start to get into the question of righteousness, where if holiness is a gift from God, do we have any part to play? And the church has been wrestling with this question from almost day one. So St. Paul, he had people in his communities who said like, well, righteousness is a gift, therefore do whatever you want. Or justice is going to be brought about when Christ returns, therefore I don't have to work. I mean, we've all sort of thought, like, can I actually pull that off? But that's where the holiness is a gift from God, and we can achieve it on our own. But when we misuse those gifts, we're falsifying, in a sense, like who we're called to be. We're falsifying our identity. It's like a husband who says one thing with his words, or a father, and then lives a completely different way in his life. It doesn't undo the reality of his fatherhood, but it's kind of, embarrassing, because he's showing to the world, or he's showing himself to be something different than what he has truly been called to be.
Right, and the greater sin is not you didn't dot I's and cross T's. The greater sin is you prove yourself to be a liar, right? Like, this is why it's hard for us in the modern world. I always point this out, that we would imagine that in the Middle Ages that like someone like Dante would put sexual sins as the worst sins, because that's what the idea, that's the stereotype, right? Is, Christians care too much about those things. But actually it's the fraudulent and the betrayers that are at the bottom. Like, Dante has the sexual sins at the top because he's like, hey, all sorts of people fall into that, right? Like, drives and eating too much, they're sins nonetheless, but like, that people fall into those things. The fraudulent and the betrayers, traitors, right? The deepest parts of hell. And that's what it is when we refuse righteousness, right? It's one thing to fail, like, Lord, I said I was going to fast on Friday, but then like I'm just a tubbo and I got hungry and I ate too much. You can ask for forgiveness and try to start over. But when you falsify righteousness, when you falsify the holiness that you've been called to live, that's the problem, right? That's the sort of fraudulent nature that casts aspersions on the kingdom of God, which is the goal that we're supposed to witness for others. And so you're exactly right, but the seek ye first the kingdom of God and you will receive all these things besides is really the idea. Is if we live into with gratitude the fact of the gift of holiness, what else will we want to do but to be witnesses to what God has done for us? And that is why things like gratitude and love, of course, and humility are at the basis of the Catholic moral life. It's not like you need to do these 10 commandments or these 8 beatitudes, or you need to check off this list of like hundreds of things in order to get to heaven. The idea is that God has granted heaven to us who don't deserve it. Will we live properly in relationship, joyfully and with gratitude and love for the gift that's been offered?
Yeah, and this is where the sacraments really are central to this whole discussion. And if someone said to me, like, how can the church live out its vocation of being set apart in a more profound manner, I would say have more times for confession. But when I say that, people might think like, oh, more confession times, because that will slowly improve the Catholic's behavior.
Right.
Hopefully it does when we're talking about doing right and acting justly. But more confession times, because we're the community not of the well-to-do or the goody two-shoes or whatever. We're the community of the forgiven. And we only, I think we start our spiritual journey sort of blind to that reality. And only by hearing the words of absolution do we begin to see like, oh, any treasures that I set at the feet of God, it's not something that I've somehow produced because I was given like greater natural capacities, but because I've seen, because I've received the grace through the sacraments. And so every part of the church's life is really oriented to this. Like when we walk into the church and cross ourselves with holy water, that water it's been touched by the Holy Spirit, and it has this kind of power that only God can provide. You and I both know this in a profound way as converts to the Catholic faith, because when we, by the grace of God, humbled ourselves and said, like, I'm being called into this new reality, it wasn't a faith that we had worked out in our own minds. It wasn't something that we had constructed from the ground up because we were, smart or anything like that. Far from it. We could only receive a reality that had existed prior to us.
Yep, and because of all that, now we don't have to worry about the problem of the occupational powers, which is the problem of holiness, right? If you're set apart, what do you do when Rome comes to town and puts its political thumb on you? What happens when the pagan empires impugn on the church? What happens when the devil with his tricks infiltrates society, the church, etc.? And I mean, we don't have loads of time, and it's probably good because we'd only make enemies. But folks, let's just be honest. A lot of the media that you're consuming, most likely, really has these declination narratives that are set out intended to scare you and act like the only way that you can be holy in the world as it is today is to follow whoever's book is currently trying to be sold. But I mean, we destroyed Rome from the inside. Why are you scared of America? What society has Christianity not outlasted? Like, do you really worry about this one? Then we'll defeat this one too. And why will we defeat this one? Because of the holiness of the crucified and resurrected one. So we don't need to worry about having violent opposition because our love is enough to destroy our enemies. We don't need to be accommodationist because we'll outlast anything. Even if we're martyred, we're going to last. So we don't need to go the way of the Sadducees. We don't need to run to any hills because, so to speak, the hill of the Essenes is in our hearts. We can always, in an inward way, go to God because we're temples of the Holy Spirit. And then finally, with what the Pharisees say, again, our holiness is going to exceed that of the Pharisees and scribes, but because it's Christ's holiness. And so we don't have to, so to speak, earn a holy land or our status as a holy people. We've been granted that. What we have to do is be willing to accept it. And to accept that is not only to ask for forgiveness, but to forgive others, to become poor and help the poor, to become like Jesus in any way, in every way possible. If we pour ourselves out for others, then there is no empire that can stand against that. And that's what this age needs to hear about the social implications of holiness.
Yeah, I like your idea, Bo, about outlasting other kingdoms. And this gets, and then my last little spiel about sacraments. This is why the Mass or the Eucharist is the source and summit of the Church's life. And each Sunday, really, I'm taken aback by, so you're talking about outlasting other kingdoms. The life that God gives us, it's rooted in these realities that are related to but transcend just this world. And so, the gift of his body and blood, we couldn't produce that. There's not some sort of work that we could do. We're called to be co-workers and we're drawn into that work, but it's something that only God can provide. And for that reason, it's not something that the world can destroy. I wish we had time to talk about the movie The Mission. Maybe we can get into that in a future day, but it's a story about Jesuit missionaries who are faced with a real injustice and they want to resist it. And these two priests have different answers to how that should be done. But the final scene of a priest leading a persecuted people into battle, carrying a monstrance before him, I think shows that what he's trusting in is going to outlast even his own earthly life. And that's what all of us are being called to in, the sometimes dire circumstances that we face today.
Absolutely. I think that's a great wrap on this mark that we talked about in the show. So we've done one and holy. Next time we'll do Catholic and Apostolic. Looking forward to completing the series with you all. This is The Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, our families, our city, state, nation, world, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week. But if folks want to join in on the prayer life here at Iowa Catholic Radio, what are the ways they can do so?
Please join us in praying the Rosary daily at 5:30 a.m., 9:30 a.m., and 9:30 p.m. We also pray the Angelus daily at 6 in the morning and the Divine Mercy Chaplet at 3 p.m. The Rosary and Divine Mercy Chaplet are available on the Iowa Catholic Radio app or at iowacatholicradio.com.
And if you want to be a part of Iowa Catholic Radio events, easy to check them out, iowacatholicradio.com. What's coming up? Iowa Catholic Radio welcomes Matt Maher and will be at the Jamie Hurd Amphitheater in West Des Moines, Saturday, June 12th at 6 p.m. with Matt Baird, First Encounter, and JMMJ. Learn more at nightfireconcerts.org. The Iowa Catholic Radio Foundation welcomes country artist Lori Morgan to the Horizons Event Center July 15th with Jesse Keith Whitley and Eli Alger. Learn more about reserving a table at celebratecountry.org, presented by Mercy One and sponsored by Valiant Wealth Family Office. Iowa Catholic Radio welcomes Casting Crowns and Jordan Feliz to the Iowa State Fair Grandstand Thursday, August 12th at 8 p.m. And also We the Kingdom to the Iowa State Fair on the Ann and Bill Riley stage Sunday, August 22nd at 8 p.m. You can learn more about both of those at iowastatefair.org. So we hope to be able to see you at the various events that we're up to, but also know that this is a ministry that goes far beyond the people you hear on air, the people behind the boards, and the people behind the desks. They all do fantastic work, but this mission is also put forth and done by you. You're a part of our ministry. You aid us, of course, by the prayers, not only ones that Bud mentioned, but your personal ones, and also the volunteer work that you do. But it's also very much the case that your material beneficence and benefaction, your donations, folks, help us stay on air and make this ministry what it is. You can donate online at Iowa Catholic Radio. You can donate on the Iowa Catholic Radio app, but you can call 515-223-1150 to donate. And we appreciate those donations because they allow us to continue this ministry of Jesus Christ. And we thank you for all that you do. Well, Bud, have you sufficiently recovered from Memorial Day weekend so to actually do real work?
I'm recovered. Looking forward to those live music options. After the COVID crisis, nothing like being outdoors with other people, listening to live music. And, you know, at the state fair, I love that kind of, not the cow smell, but like people have like spilled their soda on the ground, etc. And it's just like, it's evocative. It's like the warm air, kind of heavy air. You're sweating. And
the warm ice cream smell.
Yeah, fried ice cream wafting.
It's been a while. We look forward to it. Well, folks, it's The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and The Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.